Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are taking a look at 50 Things You're Not Supposed to Know by Russ Kick. It's a book full of historical and scientific and cultural surprises.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those books that's like a journey into the underbelly of what we think we know and peeling back layers of assumptions and revealing some genuinely unexpected truths.
Right, and we're talking about things like a pope who writes erotic novels, the CIA's surprisingly high crime count, and even plan to nuke the moon.
Yeah.
So if you are ready for some mind-blowing revelations, let's dive in.
Let's do it. The book kicks off with the Ten Commandments. You might think you know them, but there's a twist.
Yeah, I think most people know the simplified versions about honoring your parents and not stealing. But the actual list from Exodus throws in this curveball with the last commandment, and that is, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. What is that all about?
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical Sunday school lesson. Interpretations vary. Some scholars believe it was a symbolic prohibition against cruelty or mixing things that shouldn't be mixed. Others see it as a way to differentiate Israelite practices from those of neighboring pagan cultures.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, imagine that, a dietary restriction with potential links to ancient religious practices.
hmm
And that makes you wonder what other seemingly simple rules or beliefs have much deeper and perhaps stranger origins.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of unexpected religious twists, let's move on to a pope who had a rather intriguing side hustle before donning the papal tiara.
Right. Pope Pius II, known as Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini in his pre-pope days,
Yeah.
was a writer, but not just any writer. He penned a best-selling erotic novel called Historia de Duobus Amantibus, um, which translates to a story about two lovers in 15th century Europe.
Really?
Yeah,
Huh.
that was amazing.
That's something.
And it's not just some dry historical romance.
Yeah.
This book is surprisingly humorous and relatable, even by today's standards. It follows the story of Euralius, a high-ranking official who falls head over heels for a married woman named Lucrece.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the book dives into their romantic escapades with, let's say, vivid detail.
Yeah.
But it's not all just steamy encounters. Euralius also has these moments of philosophical reflection about love. In one passage, he tells Lucrece's cousin-in-law, nothing is better when love has crept into your bones than to give in to the burning. For those who strive against the tempest often wreck, while those who drive with the storm escape.
Wow, that's quite a thought-provoking,
Yeah.
quite a statement from
Uh-huh.
a future pope.
It really is. And it makes you wonder about the private lives and inner thoughts
Mm.
of other historical figures who often see as one-dimensional.
Right.
Now, shifting gears to something a little heavier. Let's talk about the CIA. This book drops a bombshell.
Yeah.
Congressional report admits the CIA commits over 100,000 serious crimes each year.
100,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot. It's a staggering number.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about, minor infractions here, but highly illegal activities, as the report describes them.
Oh, wow.
This means actions that violate major laws, potentially on a daily basis.
Hundreds of crimes per day.
Right. Hundreds of crimes per day.
Wow.
And John Kelly, a leading expert on the CIA, even called this the first official admission and definition of CIA covert operations as crimes. What implications does this have for how we view the agency and its actions?
Well, I think it forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that an organization, tasked with national security, might be operating outside the bounds of the law on a massive scale.
Right.
And it raises these critical questions about accountability and oversight. If these actions are acknowledged as criminal, then what mechanisms are in place to prevent them or to hold those responsible accountable?
Right. That is the question. This leads us to the story of Douglas McKiernan, the first CIA agent to die in the line of duty. Undercover as a diplomat in China during the 1949 communist takeover, McKiernan found himself trapped. With escape routes compromised, he embarked on this daring 1,000-mile trek to India on foot.
Wow.
Right. He crossed the desert, braved the treacherous Himalayas, only to be tragically mistaken for an enemy and killed by Tibetan border guards, just as he reached safety.
Oh, wow.
And what's particularly troubling is that the CIA still refuses to officially acknowledge McKiernan, despite his story being pieced together from various sources.
I see.
So it makes you wonder how many other agents have met similar fates, their sacrifices shrouded in secrecy. There are stories erased from the official narrative.
Right. Yeah. It makes you wonder, how much do we truly know about what happens in the shadows, and how can we hold powerful institutions accountable when their operations are veiled in such secrecy?
Right. It's a very good question. Sticking with covert operations. But fast forwarding to post 9/11, we uncovered this shocking revelation from Bob Woodward's reporting in the Washington Post. The Defense Department actually considered poisoning Afghanistan's food supply as part of their strategy.
Poisoning their food supply.
Yes.
Wow.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
The plan involved contaminating the food with a chemical or biological agent, which is a clear violation of international treaties. Thankfully, Condoleezza Rice, the national security advisor at the time, recognized the ethical and legal implications and put a stop to it.
Thankfully.
Thankfully. But it does raise an important question. If such a plan was even considered, what other ethically questionable proposals might have been floated, but never made it to public awareness?
Exactly. And it kind of points to this broader issue, the potential for governments to overreach in the name of security,
Right.
especially during times of crisis. So how do we balance the need for security with the protection of human rights and international law?
Right. It's a very tough question. Now let's talk about how the U.S. government has been playing fast and loose with statistics. When it comes to terrorism convictions, the Philadelphia Inquirer discovered the Justice Department was labeling all sorts of minor incidents as terrorism to inflate their numbers.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
We're talking about things like a drunk passenger causing a scene on a plane, a tenant impersonating an FBI agent to avoid eviction, even prisoners rioting for better food. All of these were classified as terrorism.
Oh, my goodness.
I know.
All that way.
It sounds ridiculous. And what's even more concerning is that the General Accounting Office, an independent government watchdog, confirmed these findings. They found that after 9/11, nearly half the cases touted as terrorism convictions were completely unrelated to actual terrorism.
Wow. That's disturbing.
It is. And this statistical manipulation raises serious questions about transparency and the potential for governments to use fear and misinformation to shape public perception and justify policies. So how do we ensure that the information we receive from official sources is accurate and reliable?
Right. That's a good question. It's a big question.
It is a big question. And if that wasn't concerning enough, the Defense Science Board, a powerful committee within the Pentagon, proposed creating a team, the Proactive Preemptive Operations Group, or P2OG, specifically to provoke terrorist attacks.
Provoke terrorist attacks.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And their proposed tactics included stealing money from terrorist groups,
Yeah.
Or planting false information to goad them into action. The theory was to stop attacks before they happened. But the risks are incredibly high.
So it's like they wanted to almost like create a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
The ethical implications are staggering. It really blurs the line between fighting terrorism
Yeah.
and becoming the instigator.
Yeah, it does. And that raises this critical question, in our efforts to prevent terrorism, are we at risk of creating the very conditions that foster it? And how do we balance the need for security with the potential for unintended consequences?
Right. Those are all very important questions that I don't think have easy answers.
Yeah.
Okay, let's lighten the mood a bit. With something truly out of this world, during the Cold War, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union seriously considered detonating nuclear bombs on the moon.
Detonating nuclear bombs on the moon?
Yes.
Really?
It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
But it's true. Project A119, initiated by the U.S. Air Force in 1958, aimed to demonstrate American nuclear superiority and perhaps even use the moon as a testing ground.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine the headlines? U.S. plants stars and stripes on moon, along with a mushroom cloud.
Yeah, I can imagine. That
No,
would be a...
It'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Thankfully, reason prevailed. Concerns about radioactive fallout and the potential to disrupt the lunar environment
Yeah.
led to the project being scrapped. But it is a sobering reminder of the audacious and sometimes reckless ideas that emerged during the Cold War.
Absolutely.
Right. It makes you wonder about the long-term consequences of such actions. Would detonating a nuclear weapon on the moon have had unforeseen repercussions for space exploration
Right.
or even life on Earth.
It's a chilling thought, and it really highlights the importance of scientific and ethical considerations
Yeah.
when it comes to wielding such powerful technologies,
Okay.
because we just don't know. Now, bringing things back down to Earth, let's talk about a lesser-known chapter in the history of Agent Orange. While we often associate it with the Vietnam War, turns out Agent Orange was also sprayed in Korea?
In Korea,
Yes.
over 21,000 gallons were sprayed along the DMZ between North and South Korea from 1968 to 1969, potentially exposing thousands of U.S. military personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And what's particularly disturbing is that the U.S. military was aware of this, but kept it secret for decades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was only after declassified documents came to light in the late 1990s that the VA finally sent letters to veterans who might have been exposed. But unlike those who served in Vietnam, veterans exposed in Korea aren't eligible for compensation or additional health care if they develop Agent Orange-related illnesses. This situation raises serious ethical questions about the government's responsibility to its veterans and its willingness to prioritize secrecy over their well-being. Why were these veterans denied the same care and support as those who served in Vietnam, especially when the government knew about their potential exposure?
Right.
It's a heartbreaking reminder that sometimes
Yeah.
even those who serve their country with honor are left behind. And this leads us to another historical misconception surrounding a tragic event, the Kent State Massacre.
Right.
Most people remember the events of May 4, 1970, when the Ohio National Guard opened fire on unarmed students protesting the Vietnam War, killing 4. It's a pivotal moment in American history. But it wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't even the first time college students were killed during that era. There were at least 2 other incidents, the Orangeburg Massacre in 1968 and the Jackson State Massacre just 10 days after Kent State.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Both involved the killing of unarmed black students by law enforcement. Yet these tragedies have received significantly less attention. So why have these events been largely forgotten? While Kent State remains etched in our collective memory.
Right. Yeah, it makes you think about how history is often told from a particular perspective and how the stories of marginalized groups can be silenced or overshadowed. So what other events, what other voices are missing from the historical narrative?
It's a great question. And perhaps more importantly, how can we ensure that all stories, all perspectives are heard and acknowledged so we can learn from the past and build a more inclusive and just future?
Right. A very good point.
Right. So let's continue our deep dive into 50 things you're not supposed to know after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into 50 things you're not supposed to know.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, and with each new fact, we have to reevaluate the entire picture.
This next piece is a real head-scratcher. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister who led the Allies to victory in World War II, believed in a worldwide Jewish conspiracy.
It's jarring to reconcile that image of Churchill as this heroic defender of freedom with his writings from 1920. In an essay for a London newspaper titled Zionism versus Bolshevism, A Struggle for the Soul of the Jewish People, he describes this alleged international conspiracy of Jews seeking to undermine Western civilization.
He even uses the term terrorist Jews, which is deeply unsettling, especially considering what we know about the persecution of Jews in Europe during that era.
It serves as a stark reminder that historical figures are products of their time. We can admire their accomplishments while acknowledging that they held views we now recognize as harmful and prejudiced.
It's a complex and challenging truth to grapple with, and it raises questions about how we should view historical figures in light of their flaws and prejudices. Can we separate the art from the artist, so to speak?
It's a debate that continues to this day, and it's a reminder that history is not always black and white. It's filled with nuances and contradictions that force us to confront uncomfortable truths.
Speaking of uncomfortable truths, let's delve into a chilling connection to the Holocaust. This book reveals that the Auschwitz tattoo, that symbol of dehumanization, was originally an IBM code number.
Edwin Black's book, IBM and the Holocaust, uncovers this disturbing link. IBM supplied the punch card technology that the Nazis used to track prisoners in concentration camps, essentially reducing human beings to data points.
It's a sobering reminder of how technology can be used for both good and evil. And it raises questions about the responsibility of corporations and individuals when their inventions are used for horrific purposes. Did IBM know how their technology was being used? And if so, what actions, if any, did they take to stop it?
It's a complex ethical dilemma, and it's a discussion that's still relevant today as we grapple with the implications of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and facial recognition. How do we ensure that these technologies are used ethically and responsibly?
This next fact is a bit of a curveball. Adolf Hitler's blood relatives are alive and well, living in New York State.
It's true. Journalist David Gardner tracked down Hitler's great-nephews. It turns out that Hitler's nephew, William Patrick Hitler, immigrated to the U.S. in the 1930s and had 4 sons. 3 of them are still living on Long Island running a landscaping business.
It's hard to imagine the weight of carrying that family legacy, bearing the name of one of history's most notorious figures.
It raises questions about inherited guilt and the long shadow of history. Can you truly escape the sins of your ancestors? And how do you navigate a personal identity that's inextricably linked to such a dark past?
Switching gears from villains to witches, let's dispel a common misconception. We tend to think of witch hunts as solely targeting women, but it turns out around a quarter of those accused of witchcraft were men.
It's a fact that's often overlooked in historical accounts that primarily focus on the persecution of women. Research shows that men were also targeted, particularly in certain regions like Finland, Estonia, and Iceland, where men made up the majority of the accused.
It makes you wonder what factors led to men being accused of witchcraft in those specific regions. Were there cultural or social dynamics at play that made men more vulnerable to such accusations?
It's a fascinating area for further exploration. And it reminds us that historical narratives are often incomplete, and there's always more to uncover beneath the surface.
Okay, get ready for a fact that's both disturbing and revealing about the brutal realities of early American history. During the harsh winter of 1609, colonists at Jamestown, Virginia, resorted to cannibalism to survive.
It's a grim chapter in American history, but it speaks to the desperate conditions the colonists faced. Food shortages were so severe that they were forced to consume the bodies of the dead.
It's hard to fathom the psychological toll, the moral dilemmas, and the sheer horror of having to make such a choice.
It underscores the fragility of civilization and the lengths to which humans will go to survive in extreme circumstances.
And it forces us to confront the darker aspects of human nature. Are we inherently good or evil? Or are we capable of both, depending on the circumstances?
These are profound questions that philosophers have debated for centuries. And they're questions that continue to resonate today as we face new challenges and grapple with the complexities of human behavior.
Let's move on to a topic that continues to be hotly debated today: abortion. It's almost impossible to picture the feminist movement without the fight for reproductive rights. But did you know many pioneering feminists actually opposed abortion?
It's true. Figures like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who were instrumental in the fight for women's suffrage, were vehemently against abortion.
They saw it as a symptom of women's oppression, a consequence of men forcing their will upon women's bodies.
They didn't necessarily believe in criminalizing abortion, but they viewed it as a moral wrong.
It adds another layer to the conversation about reproductive rights, doesn't it?
Right.
It challenges our modern understanding of the feminist movement and the historical context surrounding these issues.
It reminds us that even within a movement, there can be a diversity of opinions and approaches. And understanding these historical perspectives can help us engage in more nuanced and informed discussions about complex issues.
Okay, prepare to be surprised again. Black people served in the Confederate Army during the Civil War.
This one tends to raise eyebrows. It's true that thousands of Black people, both free and enslaved, were part of the Confederate military. Some served as cooks, laborers, or even musicians.
But there's evidence that some actually fought as soldiers. That seems counterintuitive, considering the Confederacy was fighting to preserve slavery.
It's a complicated issue. Some historians argue that these Black soldiers were forced into service. Others suggest some may have volunteered, either out of loyalty to their masters or in the hope of gaining freedom.
It's a reminder of the complexities of race, identity, and loyalty during one of America's most turbulent periods. And it forces us to confront the messy realities of history, where motivations and allegiances were not always clear-cut.
It also highlights the importance of understanding the experiences of individuals within larger historical narratives. Each person had their own story, their own reasons for acting the way they did.
From a historical puzzle to a technological rewind, let's talk electric cars. They're all the rage now, but they've actually been around since the 1880s.
That's right. Electric cars predate gasoline-powered vehicles. They were quite popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially in cities where they were seen as cleaner and quieter than their gas-guzzling counterparts.
It's fascinating that in 1900, electric cars made up a significant portion of all automobiles produced in the U.S. There were even electric taxi fleets in cities like New York and Chicago.
But as gasoline-powered cars became more affordable and infrastructure for them improved, electric cars gradually faded into obscurity.
It makes you wonder what our world would be like today if electric cars had continued to develop at the same pace.
Perhaps we'd be living in a world with cleaner air, quieter streets, and a less reliance on fossil fuels. It's a reminder that technological progress isn't always linear, and sometimes promising innovations get sidelined for various reasons.
Okay, let's put on our legal thinking caps for this next one. Most people assume juries only judge the facts of a case, but they actually have the power to judge the law itself.
It's called jury nullification. It means a jury can acquit a defendant even if they believe they're technically guilty, if they believe the law itself is unjust, or that applying it in that particular case would be unfair.
So it's like saying, we think you did it, but we don't think you should be punished for it.
Exactly. It's a controversial but powerful tool that allows citizens to inject their own sense of justice and morality into the legal system, which can sometimes be rigid and inflexible.
It's a fascinating concept, but it's also a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It could be used to protect the innocent from unjust laws, but it could also be used to let the guilty off the hook. It all depends on the jury's conscience and interpretation of the law.
It highlights the tension between the letter of the law and the spirit of justice, and it raises questions about the role of juries in our legal system. Are they simply arbiters of fact, or do they have a broader responsibility to consider the fairness and justness of the laws they are asked to uphold?
This next fact might make you think twice before dialing 911. The police are not legally obligated to protect you.
It's a harsh reality, but it's true in most jurisdictions. Courts have consistently ruled that police departments have a duty to protect the public as a whole, but not individual citizens.
So even if you call for help, there's no guarantee they'll actually come to your rescue.
It's a complex issue with legal and ethical implications. Some argue that it would be impossible for the police to guarantee the safety of every individual, while others believe it undermines public trust in law enforcement and creates a system where some are more vulnerable than others.
It raises fundamental questions about the social contract between citizens and the state. What are the limits of government responsibility for individual safety? And how do we balance the need for law and order with the rights and freedoms of individuals?
These are questions that societies have grappled with for centuries, and there are no easy answers.
Here's a fact that might make you want to hold on to your property deeds a little tighter. The government can take your house and land and then sell them to private corporations.
It's called eminent domain. It's a power granted to the government by the Fifth Amendment, allowing them to seize private property for public use, even if the owner doesn't want to sell.
But how can they sell it to private corporations?
That's where things get controversial. The definition of public use has been stretched and distorted over the years. Cities and towns have used eminent domain to seize homes and businesses for projects that don't really benefit the public, like shopping malls and luxury condos.
It seems like an overreach of government power.
It's a contentious issue, and there have been legal challenges to this abuse of power, but it still happens, often displacing homeowners and destroying communities in the process.
It raises questions about the balance of power between individuals and the government. How do we protect private property rights while also allowing for necessary public projects?
It's a delicate balance, and it's one that requires constant vigilance to ensure that individual rights are not trampled in the pursuit of economic development or other government objectives.
This next one is a surprising ruling from the Supreme Court that might raise a few eyebrows. The Supreme Court has ruled that you're allowed to ingest any drug, especially if you're an addict.
It's not quite as simple as it sounds. There are two key cases here. In 1925, the court ruled that doctors could prescribe narcotics to addicts to alleviate their pain, essentially acknowledging the reality of addiction as a medical condition. And in 1962, they went further, declaring that it's unconstitutional to punish someone solely for being an addict.
So you can be addicted to heroin, but you can't get arrested for it.
The punishment has to be for actions associated with the addiction, like stealing to support a habit or public intoxication, not the addiction itself.
That's a pretty significant distinction.
It raises interesting questions about how we view addiction. Is it a moral failing or a medical condition? And how should that distinction inform our approach to drug policy and treatment?
It's a debate that continues to this day. And it has far-reaching implications for criminal justice reform, healthcare, and social policy. This next one might surprise some listeners. It's about the age of consent. When someone is legally allowed to have sex, we often assume it's 18 across the board, but the truth is the age of consent in most of the U.S. is not 18.
That's right. It varies from state to state. Only 15 states have set it at 18. The most common age of consent is 16, with 27 states and Washington, D.C. using that as the benchmark.
So in those states, a 17-year-old could legally have sex with someone much older.
Yes, which is why these laws are often complex and controversial. There are usually exceptions and nuances, like taking into account the age difference between the partners or whether they're married.
It's a sensitive topic that raises important questions about consent, power dynamics, and the protection of minors.
It highlights the need for clear and consistent laws regarding sexual activity involving minors, and underscores the importance of education and open dialogue about consent and healthy relationships.
Shifting gears to the world of academia. Here's a fact that might make you question the integrity of scientific research. Most scientists don't read all the articles they cite in their papers.
It's not intentional plagiarism in most cases. A study by researchers at UCLA found that a significant percentage of citations in scientific papers are simply copied from other papers without actually checking the original source.
So it's more like intellectual laziness than outright deception.
It's a bad habit that's become commonplace, but it can lead to the perpetuation of errors and misconceptions if no one bothers to verify the information.
It definitely raises questions about the rigor and reliability of scientific research. What can be done to address this issue and ensure that scientists are accurately representing the sources they cite?
There needs to be a greater emphasis on research ethics and the importance of verifying information. Peer review processes could also be strengthened to catch these errors.
Let's talk about Louis Pasteur, the renowned scientist credited with germ theory and pasteurization. But this book reveals a less than flattering side of him.
During his famous debate with Félix Pouchet over spontaneous generation, Pasteur conducted experiments that seemingly supported his opponent's view. However, he chose to keep those findings secret and only published the experiments that confirmed his own beliefs.
So he cherry-picked the data to fit his narrative.
It's an example of confirmation bias, where we tend to seek out and favor information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if it means ignoring evidence to the contrary.
It's a reminder that even brilliant scientists can be swayed by their own biases. It underscores the importance of objectivity and intellectual honesty in scientific inquiry.
And it highlights the need for scientists to be open to being wrong, to revising their theories in light of new evidence. Science is a process of discovery, and sometimes that means admitting our mistakes and changing our minds.
This next one might surprise you. James Lovelock, the creator of the Gaia hypothesis, which views the Earth as a self-regulating living organism, is a strong supporter of nuclear power.
It seems counterintuitive, but Lovelock argues that the dangers of fossil fuels far outweigh the risks of nuclear power, which he sees as a clean and efficient energy source.
Isn't nuclear power considered a major environmental threat?
Lovelock's position is definitely controversial. He even suggests using nuclear waste to protect environmentally sensitive areas, arguing that no one would dare cut down a forest if it were a nuclear waste storage site.
That's a radical idea.
It highlights the complexities of the energy debate and the need to consider all options, even those that might seem unconventional or counterintuitive.
It also reminds us that there are often trade-offs to consider when it comes to environmental issues. What risks are we willing to accept in order to transition to a more sustainable energy future?
These are difficult questions without easy answers, and they require a careful weighing of risks and benefits, as well as a consideration of the ethical implications of our choices.
Get ready for a fact that sounds like it's straight out of a science fiction movie. Genetically engineered humans have already been born.
It's true. In 2001, doctors at a fertility clinic in New Jersey announced they had created nearly 30 babies using a technique called euplasmic transfer. This involves injecting the mother's egg with mitochondria from a donor woman.
So these babies have DNA from 3 different people.
Exactly. And since mitochondria contain their own DNA, this genetic modification can be passed down to future generations.
That's mind-blowing, but also a little unsettling. Do we fully understand the long-term consequences of tinkering with the human genome in this way?
It's a Pandora's box that's been opened, and it raises a whole host of ethical and societal questions about the future of human evolution. Do we have the right to manipulate the genetic makeup of future generations? And what are the potential risks and benefits of such interventions?
These are questions that society needs to grapple with as we enter a new era of genetic engineering. The technology is advancing rapidly, and it's crucial that we have thoughtful and informed discussions about its implications. Now, let's talk about something a little closer to home, our wallets and our health. The insurance industry wants to genetically test all policyholders.
It's no secret that insurance companies are interested in using genetic information to assess risk and set premiums.
But wouldn't that lead to discrimination? What if they deny coverage or charge exorbitant rates based on your genetic predisposition to certain diseases?
It's a slippery slope that could lead to a world where people are judged and categorized based on their genes, not their individual merits.
It raises serious ethical concerns about privacy, autonomy, and the potential for genetic information to be used against us.
We need strong regulations to protect individuals from genetic discrimination and ensure that this information is used responsibly and ethically.
We all know smoking is bad for you. But did you know that smoking causes a whole host of other problems that most people aren't even aware of?
Cigarettes don't just affect your lungs. They wreak havoc on virtually every system in your body, from your eyes to your bones to your reproductive system. They increase your risk of everything from diabetes and osteoporosis to depression and hearing loss.
It's a stark reminder that there's no such thing as a safe cigarette. And quitting is the best thing you could do for your health, no matter how long you've been smoking.
It's also important to remember the devastating effects of secondhand smoke, especially on children.
This highlights the need for strong public health campaigns to educate people about the dangers of smoking and to support those who are trying to quit.
And it underscores the importance of policies that protect non-smokers from exposure to secondhand smoke, such as smoke-free workplaces and public spaces.
Here's something that might make you think twice before pouring yourself a glass of milk. Herds of milk-producing cows are rife with bovine leukemia virus.
It's a type of cancer that's widespread in dairy cows, and it can be transmitted through their milk.
Wait, so I could be drinking cow cancer cells?
Pasteurization kills the virus, so commercially produced milk is safe. But it's a reminder that even something as seemingly wholesome as milk can carry hidden risks.
It makes you wonder what other potential hazards might exist in our food supply that we aren't aware of.
It highlights the importance of food safety regulations and the need for transparency in the food industry. Consumers have a right to know how their food is produced and what potential risks it might pose.
Time for a quick quiz. How much radiation do you think you're exposed to during a C-TEC scan?
Most people underestimate the amount. A single C-TEC scan delivers 100 to 250 times the radiation dose of a chest X-ray.
And a study found that most doctors don't even know this. They're ordering these scans without fully understanding the risks they pose to their patients.
It's a reminder that medical technology, while often beneficial, can also have unintended consequences.
It's crucial for both patients and doctors to be informed about the risks and benefits of any procedure, and to consider whether the potential benefits outweigh the potential risks.
It also highlights the need for continuing education for medical professionals to ensure they stay up to date on the latest research and best practices.
Let's talk about another hidden danger lurking in hospitals: medication errors. Thousands of people die each year from getting the wrong drug or the wrong dosage.
It's a shocking statistic that highlights the fallibility of the healthcare system.
Everything from illegible handwriting to similar-sounding drug names can contribute to these errors, which can have devastating consequences.
It emphasizes the need for robust safety protocols in hospitals and other healthcare settings to prevent these errors from happening.
Even when medications are dispensed correctly, there's still a risk of serious side effects. Studies have shown that prescription drugs kill over 100,000 people annually in the U.S.
It's a sobering reminder that all drugs, even those prescribed by a doctor, carry risks.
It's essential to be informed about the potential side effects of any medication you take and to monitor your health closely for any adverse reactions.
And to communicate openly with your doctor about any concerns you have.
We often think of war as the ultimate cause of death, but work actually kills more people than war.
The International Labor Organization estimates that over 2 million people die each year from work-related injuries and illnesses, which is more than double the number of deaths from warfare.
It's a reminder that danger can lurk in the most mundane places.
And it underscores the importance of workplace safety regulations and the need for employers to prioritize the well-being of their employees.
Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about a demographic that's often overlooked when it comes to mental health: the elderly. It turns out the suicide rate is highest among the elderly.
That's right. People over the age of 75 have the highest suicide rates of any age group.
It's a tragic statistic that highlights the unique challenges faced by many elderly individuals. They often grapple with isolation, loneliness, chronic pain, and loss of independence.
It's a reminder to check in on our elderly loved ones and be mindful of their emotional and mental health.
We need to provide them with support and resources to help them navigate the challenges of aging and to address any mental health issues they may be facing.
And to create communities that are inclusive and supportive of older adults.
Let's talk about the reliability of medical tests. You might be surprised to learn that for low-risk people, a positive result from an HIV test is wrong half the time.
It's true, the standard HIV test, while highly accurate, can still produce false positives, especially in populations with a low prevalence of the virus. If you're not in a high-risk group, a positive test result should always be followed up with additional testing to confirm the diagnosis.
That's reassuring to know. But it also highlights the importance of understanding the limitations of medical tests and not jumping to conclusions based on a single result.
And the importance of discussing any concerns you have with your doctor.
DNA matching is often portrayed as the gold standard of forensic evidence. But is it truly infallible?
While highly accurate, DNA matching isn't foolproof. Errors can occur both in the lab and in the interpretation of the results. There have been cases where samples have been mixed up, where labs have made mistakes in their analysis, and even where DNA analysts have intentionally falsified results.
That's terrifying to think about. It makes you question the reliability of what we consider to be the most irrefutable scientific evidence.
It underscores the need for rigorous quality control in forensic labs and for the justice system to be aware of the potential for human error in DNA testing.
And to be open to the possibility of wrongful convictions based on faulty evidence.
Exactly. No scientific evidence is perfect, and it's crucial to scrutinize even the seemingly most ironclad evidence.
Another test that's often depicted as infallible is the polygraph, or lie detector test. But the truth is much less dramatic.
An FBI expert testified that lie detectors are essentially worthless for security screening. Drew Richardson, who spent 25 years in the FBI, including several years working with polygraphs, testified before a Senate subcommittee that polygraphs have no scientific basis and can be easily manipulated.
So all those dramatic scenes in movies where someone sweats under the interrogation lamp and the needle goes haywire are basically fiction.
Pretty much. Richardson even compared the accuracy of polygraphs to that of astrology or tea leaf reading.
It makes you wonder why these tests are still used, especially in high-stakes situations like security screenings and criminal investigations.
It raises concerns about the potential for false positives and false negatives, and it highlights the need for more reliable methods of detecting deception.
Okay, here's a fact that might surprise you. Aspirin, the common over-the-counter pain reliever, and heroin were both manufactured by the same company.
It's true. Bayer, the German pharmaceutical giant, introduced heroin to the world in 1898. They marketed it as a cough suppressant and pain reliever. It was even sold over the counter.
It's hard to believe that something as dangerous and addictive as heroin was once considered a harmless medicine.
It's a reminder of how our understanding of drugs and their effects has evolved over time, and how substances that were once thought to be safe can later be revealed to be harmful, even deadly.
This highlights the importance of scientific research and the need to continually reevaluate the safety and efficacy of drugs, even those that have been in use for many years.
And to be aware of the potential for misuse and abuse, even with substances that are intended for medical purposes.
LSD, the psychedelic drug often associated with counterculture and illicit experimentation, has been successfully used in psychiatric therapy.
From the 1950s to the 1970s, LSD was used by psychiatrists and therapists to treat various mental health conditions, including anxiety, depression, and addiction.
How does that work?
LSD can induce altered states of consciousness and profound psychological experiences. When combined with therapy, this can help patients confront their traumas, gain insights into their behaviors, and explore new ways of thinking and feeling.
It sounds a bit risky.
It can be if not used responsibly and under the guidance of a qualified professional, but there's a growing body of research suggesting that psychedelics like LSD, when used in a therapeutic setting, can have profound benefits for mental health.
It's interesting to consider how our perception of certain drugs has evolved over time, and to recognize the potential for substances that were once demonized to have therapeutic applications.
It highlights the need for open-mindedness and a willingness to reevaluate our assumptions about drugs and their potential uses.
This next one might make you smile. Carl Sagan, the beloved astronomer and science communicator, was an avid pot smoker.
Sagan wrote about his experiences with marijuana in an essay published under the pseudonym Mr. X. He described how marijuana enhanced his appreciation for art, music, and even his scientific work.
It's funny to think of Sagan getting high and having cosmic revelations.
It humanizes him, right? Even brilliant scientists can enjoy a little recreational indulgence. And it highlights the diverse ways in which people find inspiration and creativity.
This leads us to a story about military heroism and the dark side of human nature. One of the heroes of Black Hawk Down, the book and movie about the disastrous U.S. raid in Somalia, was later convicted of child molestation.
John Stebby Stebbins, one of the Army Rangers featured in the story, was later court-martialed for the rape and sodomy of a child under 12.
That's horrifying. How did they handle that in the movie?
They changed his name to avoid embarrassing the military.
It's a sad reminder that even those who display courage and heroism in one area of their lives can be capable of monstrous acts in others.
It forces us to confront the complexities of human nature and to recognize that heroism and villainy are not always mutually exclusive.
SUVs are often seen as symbols of status and rugged individualism. But did you know that the auto industry itself admits that SUV drivers are often driven by fear and insecurity?
It's true. Internal marketing documents from car companies reveal that they target SUV buyers by appealing to their anxieties about safety and their desire to project an image of power and dominance.
So they're playing on our fears and insecurities to sell us these gas-guzzling behemoths.
It's a classic marketing tactic. Create a need and then offer a product to fulfill it, and it's been incredibly effective in the case of SUVs.
It's a reminder that we're constantly being bombarded with messages that try to manipulate our emotions and influence our behavior. And it's up to us to be aware of these tactics and to make informed decisions about what we buy and why.
We need to be critical consumers, not just of products, but of information and ideas as well.
Let's talk about the power of language and how words can be both powerful and problematic. The word squaw, often considered a derogatory term for Native American women, might not be as offensive as we think.
It's a complex issue. While squaw has been used as a slur and is widely considered offensive, some linguistic scholars argue that its original meaning in Algonquin languages was simply woman.
So how did it become such a loaded term?
It's a case of linguistic colonialism, where the dominant culture takes a word from a marginalized group and twists its meaning, turning it into a weapon of oppression.
It's a reminder of how language can be used to both empower and dehumanize. And it highlights the importance of understanding the historical context of words and their impact on different groups of people.
We need to be mindful of the language we use and be sensitive to the ways in which words can perpetuate harmful stereotypes and prejudices.
Here's a little tip that might save you some money. You can mail letters for little or no cost.
Really? How?
There are various techniques, from using old stamps to exploiting loopholes in postal regulations. The book, How to Screw the Post Office, is a great resource for anyone who wants to give the Postal Service a run for their money.
I'm sure the postal workers would appreciate that.
Probably not, but hey, knowledge is power.
Speaking of power, this next fact exposes the hidden hand that often shapes the news we consume. Advertisers wield significant influence over the news media.
It's not exactly a secret that news organizations rely on advertising revenue to stay afloat. But it's easy to underestimate the extent to which advertisers can influence the content of the news.
Surveys of newspaper editors have revealed that advertisers have threatened to pull their ads over stories they didn't like. They've pressured editors to kill or soften stories, and have even succeeded in influencing the content of news reports.
So the news isn't always as objective and unbiased as it pretends to be.
It's important to be aware of the potential for bias in news reporting and to consider the sources of information when forming our own opinions.
And to seek out diverse perspectives and to be critical consumers of news media.
Exactly. We need to be discerning readers and viewers, questioning what we see and hear, and seeking out alternative sources of information.
To wrap up our deep dive into the world of things we're not supposed to know, let's talk about a topic that might shake your faith in museums and art galleries. The world's museums contain countless fakes.
Art forgery has been around for centuries. Museums are full of counterfeits. Everything from ancient Egyptian artifacts to Renaissance paintings to modern sculptures.
Wait, those priceless masterpieces might not be the real deal.
Even experts can be fooled. Forgers are incredibly skilled at replicating the style and techniques of famous artists, and they often use materials and methods consistent with the period in which the work was supposedly created.
So how can you tell if a work of art is genuine?
It's not always easy, even for experts. There are clues to look for, such as inconsistencies in the materials, brushstrokes, or even the signature of the artist.
It's a reminder that we can't always take things at face value, even in institutions that are supposed to be repositories of truth and authenticity.
And it highlights the importance of critical thinking, questioning assumptions, and doing our own research.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into 50 Things You're Not Supposed to Know by Russ Kick. It's been a wild ride full of surprises and unsettling truths.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn, more to question, and more to uncover.
And that the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong journey. So keep those minds open, folks, and never stop exploring the world with curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the unknown.
It's amazing to think that with all that we've discussed today, there's still so much more in this book.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We've only just skimmed the surface of what Russ Kick has uncovered in 50 Things You're Not Supposed to Know. There are so many other fascinating and often unsettling facts that he reveals, ranging from government secrets to corporate cover-ups to scientific scandals.
Right. And it really makes you wonder, what else is out there? What other truths are being hidden or suppressed? And how can we become more informed and discerning citizens in a world where information is so readily available, but not always reliable?
Exactly. We live in this age of information overload, but it's also an age of misinformation and disinformation. So it's more important than ever to be critical thinkers, to question everything, and to seek out multiple perspectives before forming our own opinions.
Right. And, one of the things that this book really drives home is that knowledge is power, but only if it's accurate and unbiased knowledge. If we're only exposed to one side of the story, or if we're being fed propaganda, then we're not really empowered. We're actually being manipulated.
Absolutely. It's like the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. If we're consuming junk information, then our thinking is going to be junk as well. We need to be careful about the sources we trust and be willing to do our own research to verify what we're being told.
And, it's not just about being skeptical of the information we receive from external sources. We also need to be aware of our own internal biases, the preconceived notions and assumptions that we bring to the table. These biases can cloud our judgment and prevent us from seeing things objectively.
Yeah, that's so true. We all have biases, whether we're conscious of them or not. And it takes real effort to recognize and challenge those biases so that we can be more open-minded and fair in our assessments.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is this. Be curious, be skeptical, and be willing to question everything.
I agree. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, to dig deeper, and to seek out those hidden truths that might just change the way you see the world.
Right, because the more we know, the more we realize how much we don't know. And that's the beauty of learning. It's a never-ending journey of discovery.
Well said.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into 50 Things You're Not Supposed to Know.
Yeah.
We hope you found it as enlightening and thought-provoking as we did.
It's been a pleasure.
And we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. Until next time, stay curious.
And see you then.